They normally just sit in the fridge, however someone puts them in.
In the bag, I think.
Yeah, same.
Yeah,
But
or
they
just sitting there.
Yeah, you and me both. But they last 10 times longer when stored in an airtight container lined with a paper towel. Does that make sense?
That's very diligent. That does make sense. I don't do that either. But then I get through my veggies quite quickly. I mean, I eat lots of veggies, and so I would take them out of the bag and put them into the veggie bin in the fridge and then eat them.
How quickly do you eat your veggies? If you bought, carrots on the weekend, would you still be eating them at the end of the week?
Well, it depends how many you buy.
I know, but would you think, oh no, I don't want to eat more than 4-day-old veggies because they've lost some of their goodness? You don't mind that?
No, I wouldn't. But so what I'm doing now is trying to buy only, as this is another principle of love, food, hate, waste. Actually, is only buying what I'm going to eat in the next few days because I'm just cooking for me now. It's I try to operate on fridge zero. So you get down to fridge zero and then you buy more food.
Fridge zero.
It's good, isn't it?
The Dove body-shaped shower gel bottles. It's yesterday's story, really, but they've been assailed online, and so the conversation continues because people are taking this very seriously, or not. Each bottle evokes the shapes, sizes, curves and edges that combine to make every woman her very own limited edition. A lot has been said about these. They're not even on sale yet. They've just been sent to influencers and celebrities, like your good self.
No, I didn't get any.
It's just, I suppose it is totally inconsequential in a way, but the whole internet seems to be talking about them. Do you have an opinion here?
Well, I hadn't. This had passed me by actually until today, until you sent me the link, and I showed it to. I was in the Healthy Food Guide office today. I showed it to all the women working there because it's an office of women mostly.
Yes.
And I have to say, pretty underwhelmed they were by the whole thing. Someone cynically suggested that it's just Dove's idea of getting more shelf space because they've got all these different bottles that they get more facings in the store and they can sell more product.
Do you think it works that way? I suppose it does.
Yeah, probably.
Because they all look different. You
Yeah.
think they're different. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll stock all four.
But no one really said, wow, that makes me feel empowered as a woman and, oh, that reflects my body shape and that means yeah, go me. No.
And the very squat one is weird. I mean, imagine if you were sent the very fat bottle. I don't fully understand
No.
that.
It's fantastic marketing, though, isn't it? If the whole of the online population is talking about it.
It's true.
It's
Dove
a
do have a
fantastic
knack
free
for
way to
doing
get-
those kinds of campaigns,
Yeah.
don't they?
Yeah.
Fantastic free way to get your name out there.
Hugh, have you noticed people dumping their old furniture by the side of the road more in Dunedin? Because it does happen in Auckland, and this is in Dunedin, New Zealand's most effective CCTV cameras, the ones which caught a French tourist using a Dunedin street as a toilet. They've been in action again, and this time they have caught a motorist taking 2 trips down Vogel Street to dump furniture on a Sunday afternoon, and he did this, allegedly, by swerving his green Mitsubishi Pajero from side to side so the items fell off the trailer. And they were a cabinet, 3 couches, a heater.
Interesting.
Is this a tradition now in Dunedin?
I'm not too sure. I know in North Dunedin that a lot of rubbish does get left behind at the end of the year when people move out of flats and they don't have the means to chuck it on trailers or get it down to the dump where it costs you an arm and a leg, so they just leave it there. But we're hopefully looking at creating some sort of system where we can get some sort of buy and sell going with all those sort of old furniture items.
Oh, good luck with
find the
that.
space.
Yeah, that's interesting initiative. Very good. Hugh Baird, thank you so much for being on the panel with us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
No, and do come back. And Nikki Bezant, always a pleasure.
Yes,
Thank you.
likewise.
And that's us for the day. We're back tomorrow. Thank you, everybody. And Checkpoint is coming right up with John Campbell.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight, FBI Director James Comey hears of his sacking by President Donald Trump from the media whilst on a trip to visit FBI agents in LA. It came as subpoenas went out in the FBI's Russia investigation. We have the latest, we have reaction, we have commentary, we have the lot. A report into Havelock North's water contamination crisis finds authorities failed the public. We return to some of the people who got so very unwell. Auckland Council investigates damage to 170 children's graves by contractors carrying out maintenance, and the Transport Agency obtains a permit to kill seals who get in the way of construction near Kaikōura.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho.
A government inquiry into the Havelock North water contamination crisis has found councils did not do enough to protect people from getting sick. The inquiry follows a gastrobug outbreak in August last year that affected more than 5,000 people in the town and may have contributed to 3 deaths. It found the Hastings District Council and Hawke's Bay Regional Council didn't have substantial plans in place to deal with the contamination. Lynn Stevens QC says District Council officers also made mistakes which delayed the preparation of a water safety plan.
The District Council's failings applied especially to its mid-level managers who delegated tasks but did not adequately supervise or ensure their implementation.
Lynn Stevens says while the failures did not directly cause the outbreak, the outcome might have been different without them. The Attorney-General, Chris Finlayson, says all councils should immediately take note of the findings as there's nothing more fundamental than clean water. Most New Zealanders now face a huge struggle moving from renting to first-time home ownership. New analysis from the Ministry of Business Innovation and Employment says they would be better off renting than buying. Jacob McSweeney reports.
The analysis shows that people wanting to move from renting to owning a house will find repayment so onerous that 81% will slip below average levels of financial viability. If they cut their losses and keep on renting, the costs will be slightly cheaper, but 66% of them will still have less disposable income than the average. This is compared with an average level of income retained by people after paying for housing costs and was set in 2013. Two housing analysts, Alan Johnson and Shamuel Jacob, say the housing crisis is serious and should have been dealt with years ago. Ko Jacob McSweeney, Tēnei.
Democrats in the United States are accusing the President, Donald Trump, of obstruction of justice after he fired the FBI director who was leading the investigation into the Trump campaign's alleged ties to Russia. James Comey was ousted after misleading Congress last week in testimony relating to Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server. From Washington, Simon Marks reports.
In his letter firing James Comey, President Trump claims he was told 3 times by the now former FBI director that he's not under investigation. But Mr. Comey was heading the FBI's inquiry into alleged collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. And Democrats like Senator Charles Schumer are blasting the White House for obstruction of justice.
First question the administration has to answer is why now?
They want an independent prosecutor to be appointed, but that can't happen without Republican support. Simon Marks, RNZ News, Washington.
A tourism leader says laws may have to be changed to allow the Department of Conservation and private operators to make money from conservation land. Tourism industry Aotearoa is calling for the government to make it easier for private firms to invest in new attractions on the conservation estate. The group's chief executive, Chris Roberts, says the priority is to protect the environment and wildlife as DOC struggles to cope with record tourists. He says private sector investors could build new tracks and run huts as a business, while DOC should be able to control visitors and charge on popular tracks. He says the law might have to change.
It is going to need a full review of the Conservation Act. Not to try and override any conservation values, that's certainly not the intention, but to give DOC more flexibility.
Chris Roberts made the call as part of tourism industry Aotearoa's election year manifesto released at the tourist industry conference Trends. The Minister for Primary Industries has announced a $5 million package to support farmers and growers with quake-damaged land. During a visit to North Canterbury today, Nathan Guy said the November quake caused significant erosion and damage to land in the Kaikōura, Marlborough and Hurunui districts. Mr Guy said the fund, which will be managed by his ministry, will help farmers, growers and foresters decide what to do with damaged land. He says it will include funding for professional advice for land use planning and support projects that investigate options for long-term land use. It's 5:04. To sport on Warriors first 5/8, Kieran Foran says drugs are a society-wide problem, not just an issue within league. The 26-year-old moved to Auckland to get help for personal problems, and Warriors bosses have raised concerns he might not be ready to move back to Sydney. Foran says news of league players Kevin Proctor and Jesse Bromwich allegedly using cocaine at the weekend is disappointing, but doesn't reflect a drug culture within League. He says his life is back on track and he's ready to go back to Australia.
Society's got a drug problem. You know, I agree with what Todd Greenberg said the other day, and I think he's spot on. I think society's got a drug problem, and I've done a lot of work on myself over the last 7 months since I've been here, and I'm a lot stronger person, I'm a lot more comfortable person, and you know, I've got no doubt in my mind that when I return to Sydney next year that I'll be fine.
League player Kieran Foran. Meanwhile, Kiwis forward Kevin Proctor has been given a 4-week ban from his NRL club for the cocaine scandal. The Gold Coast Titans handed down the ban as well as a $21,000 fine. Proctor will also remain excluded from his co-captaincy role until further notice. The America's Cup defender Oracle has copied Team New Zealand and installed a bike grinding station on its boat just 2 weeks before competition begins in Bermuda. Emirates Team New Zealand, who are located opposite the Oracle Team USA base at the Royal Dockyard, noted on social media site Facebook that they aren't the only ones using cycle power anymore. Previously, Oracle claimed they'd looked at the idea but dismissed it as unworkable. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Dracula tourism in Romania. Sounds like a double-edged sword. On one level, great brand awareness. Will that brand scare the punters away? Duncan Light's been sinking his teeth into the topic. The BBC asks why some short people lie about their height. Steve Bronius has more to say to his mum. And this week's overseas correspondent Motoko Kakibayashi is on the line from Tokyo on Nights with me, Brian Crump, from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Net service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waikato and Bay of Plenty. A few showers turning to rain tomorrow with localised downpours from evening. Waitomo to Taranaki and the central high country. Fine at first, a few showers developing this evening, turning to rain tomorrow with downpours from afternoon. Whanganui to Wellington, also Gisborne to Wairarapa. Mainly fine today with high cloud. Rain spreading from the west tomorrow, briefly heavy. Nelson and the Marlborough Sounds, rain with heavy falls, clearing tomorrow evening. For the remainder of Marlborough, patchy rain becoming heavy for a time tomorrow. Buller and Westland, periods of rain, heavy at times with a possible thunderstorms, easing to a few showers tomorrow afternoon. Canterbury and Otago, areas of low cloud or fog today. Scattered rain developing overnight, then clearing tomorrow afternoon. Southland and Fiordland, fine today, scattered showers tomorrow, and the Chatham Islands, fine spells, drizzle tomorrow night. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks so much, Katrina. Coming up on the program, the inquiry into Havelock North's water and damaged graves in the children's section of an Auckland cemetery. But we begin tonight with Donald Trump firing the director of the FBI, James Comey, whose investigations, plural, into Hillary Clinton's emails had the effect of helping put Trump in the White House, today received a letter telling him he was, and I quote, terminated and removed from office effective immediately. Comey wasn't in his office, he was in LA. But exactly as Trump was firing Comey, the FBI was issuing grand jury subpoenas to associates of former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn as part of its Russia investigation. The White House insisted Comey's termination was because he mishandled the Clinton email investigation, but many people in Washington were joining dots that linked to Russia. As a commentator said on CNN, this is an investigator investigating the White House, and he has just been fired by the White House. Bridget Burke reports.
You're fired.
Shock across the United States as FBI Director James Comey is fired by US President Donald Trump. Just hours before the sacking was made public, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer was asked at a press conference about the pair's working relationship.
Does the president still have confidence, full confidence in FBI Director James Comey?
I have no reason to believe. I haven't asked him, so I have not asked the president since the last time we spoke about this.
And the last time you spoke about it, you said he did have confidence, but you're not sure to say that again now?
Well, I don't, in light of what you're telling me, I don't want to start speaking on behalf of the president without speaking to him first.
Comey's contract was terminated halfway through his 10-year term at the recommendation of the Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who said Comey was no longer able to effectively lead the agency. It's understood Mr. Comey learnt of his sacking from media reports whilst meeting FBI agents in Los Angeles. In a statement, the president said, "Today will mark a new beginning for our crown jewel of law enforcement." Comey's sacking comes just days after he appeared before the Senate defending his handling of the Clinton email probe, adding for the first time publicly he had felt uneasy.
Look, this was terrible. It makes me mildly nauseous to think that we might have had some impact on the election, but honestly, it wouldn't change the decision.
Comey came under fire for including apparent false and misleading information at the Senate hearing about the number and kind of emails sent by Hillary Clinton's aide Uma Abedin to her husband Anthony Weiner. His sudden dismissal comes as the FBI investigates Russian interference in last year's election campaign and possible collusion with the Trump campaign. The Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer told a press conference after the sacking he questioned whether the agency's investigation had got too close to home for the president.
President Trump called me and informed me he was firing Director Comey. I told the president, Mr. President, with all due respect, you are making a big mistake. The first question the administration has to answer is why now? If the administration had objections to the way Director Comey handled the Clinton investigation, they had those objections the minute the president got into office. But they didn't fire him then. Why did it happen today? We know the House is investigating Russian interference in our elections that benefited the Trump campaign. We know the Senate is investigating. We know the FBI has been looking into whether the Trump campaign colluded with the Russians, a very serious offense. Were these investigations getting too close to home for the president?
Mr. Schumer said the situation had become part of a deeply troubling pattern from the Trump administration.
They fired Sally Yates. They fired Preet Bharara, and now they fired Director Comey, the very man leading the investigation. This does not seem to be a coincidence. This investigation must be run as far away as possible from this White House and as far away as possible from anyone that President Trump has appointed. The only way the American people can have faith in this investigation is for it to be led by a fearless, independent special prosecutor. If Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein does not appoint an independent special prosecutor, every American will rightly suspect that the decision to fire Director Comey was part of a cover-up.
Republican Senator John McCain paid tribute to Comey, saying he was a man of honour and integrity, but said he respected Donald Trump's decision.
I regret that took place. The president does have that authority, so I respect that. Okay?
Democratic Senator for Pennsylvania Bob Casey said the president's actions were outrageous and inappropriate.
I think a firing like this creates a chilling effect on the next FBI director when you know that the administration that appoints you could fire you because they don't like the way you conduct your investigation.
But Republican Senator for Maine and member of the Senate Intelligence Committee Susan Collins said the sacking would have no impact on the committee's investigation.
It's a bipartisan investigation that we have underway. We've made a lot of progress in the last couple of weeks, and we're going to continue to vigorously follow the evidence wherever it leads us.
In contrast, Democratic Senator for Virginia Mark Warner, who also sits on the Senate Intelligence Committee, said he was appalled.
You look at the actions of this administration, firing the acting Attorney General Yates when they didn't agree with her, firing all these U.S. attorneys in an unprecedented way, now firing the FBI director, refusing to acknowledge that there's any there, maybe the only person in Washington, that White House, that would say that. I hope in many ways that there doesn't prove to be anything for the sake of the presidency, but boy, oh boy, I've never seen this much smoke without there being some fire someplace.
Both President Trump and Mr. Comey weren't commenting tonight, but Mr. Comey was pictured boarding a plane at Los Angeles Airport as the search for his replacement begins. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
In Washington, the day was unfolding in fairly usual terms until from nowhere that extraordinary Trump letter. Trump had been critical of James Comey before the election and then, of course, euphoric when Comey reopened his investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails on the eve of the election itself. But since the inauguration, any White House FBI attentions have been around Russia, not Clinton's emails. So at CNN, Shimon Prokupecz and all his colleagues simply had not seen this coming.
Trump has never publicly said that he lost confidence in the director. He never intimated that he had any issues. There were a lot of questions leading into the inauguration, into whether or not the director, whether the Comey would stay and whether he would keep him. And every indication was that he had confidence in Comey. And there was even a meeting at the White House where he kind of was playful with Comey after the inauguration. And there was like a sort of a hug or handshake, kind of close handshake. So there was never any indication from anyone that there were any issues between Comey and Trump. And then this just suddenly came today. Really, it came out of nowhere. So there were never any indications, never any hint that there was this dissatisfaction with Comey. So certainly everyone was caught by surprise. And granted, the Russia investigation is heating up. We're just now reporting that grand jury subpoenas have been issued. So things are heating up there. So of course people are wondering, did the Russia investigation have anything to do with this? Obviously Trump has denied it. His people have denied it. But it is a plausible question. It just, no one can understand why this happened today.
James Comey himself was out of town, not forewarned, not forearmed, not in his office. He was caught out and the FBI was caught out too. For
a while, we couldn't even get anyone on the phone at the FBI. And the way Comey found out was through news reports. The director was out in L.A. speaking at one of the field offices because he's supposed to speak at an event, and that's how he basically was watching the news with some of his agents in a room, and that's how he learned of it. And then, maybe a half hour before he learned of it, a letter was dropped off at the FBI headquarters, and basically telling him he was fired from the president. So, everyone was shocked. This is definitely there's. I think all of our mouths dropped when we saw this news, when the White House announced this, because we just couldn't believe it. This just came out of nowhere. Trump himself has not been seen in 5 days. So, who knows what he's been working on, but, certainly this is one of the things, and no one saw this coming.
Shimon Prokupecz from CNN. The on-the-record justification for Comey's termination was his mishandling of Clinton's emails, a mishandling of which Trump himself was the main beneficiary. But as Comey was being fired, federal prosecutors in the FBI's Russia probe were issuing grand jury subpoenas. So, is the Clinton email explanation plausible? Here's Stephen Dinan from the Washington Times, who was working in the Senate press gallery and thought a colleague was joking when she told him Comey had gone.
The way that it might be a plausible explanation is this. So, the administration says that they were obviously very unhappy with the fact that Comey cleared Mrs. Clinton. The Democrats are unhappy that Comey said anything at all about Mrs. Clinton. The defense there is that both sides were unhappy with Comey's handling of it, and I can understand that both sides were unhappy with Comey's handling. Comey himself sort of made the situation worse with this testimony here in Congress last week. He basically had defended his decision-making back then, which again didn't leave either side particularly happy. Now, the key ingredient here is that the guy who actually wrote the key memo, and this all gets way in the weeds, in the details, but the guy who wrote the key memo justifying the firing was the Deputy Attorney General, and he's only just recently taken office because the Democrats delayed his nomination for so long. So the Trump administration's defense is, hey, Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, the chief guy at the Justice Department, had recused himself from most of these dealings, so we needed to wait for the Deputy Attorney General, the guy who's actually involved in this sort of stuff, to come on board and give us a valid, independent evaluation of Jim Comey's role. Now that he came on board several weeks ago, he's finally done that evaluation, and his evaluation finds that Clinton stuff was so bad that he had to go, that he has helped the FBI lose the confidence of the American people. As I said, is that explanation going to wash with most Americans? Probably not, but it will wash with some, and particularly those who want to give Trump the benefit of the doubt.
Absolutely, and Trump's great success is playing to his tribe, right? So the people it doesn't wash with don't support him already. The bigger issue, I guess, is what happens now to the Russia investigation. I mean, the White House has effectively just sacked the guy investigating the White House, right?
Yeah, yes, and it's sort of funny. In the letter that President Trump sent to Comey, the firing letter that the White House then released to the public, the president very pointedly begins the letter by saying, even though you have told me personally 3 times, Mr. Comey, that I am not under investigation, I'm going to go ahead and fire you for these reasons. So the president was very determined to lock Jim Comey into what the president says were personal guarantees that the president is not the subject of this investigation, getting that out there. So, a striking move. The key thing about this, not only does this decapitate the FBI's investigation right now, and it means, the person that President Trump will nominate to take over at the FBI will have to pick up this investigation. That person, almost by definition, is going to be tainted by being President Trump's nominee. Comey, of course, was appointed by President Obama, his predecessor. So not only does this decapitate the FBI investigation, it actually goes further. There are several other investigations going on, one in our U.S. House and several in our U.S. Senate. And both of those, those committees have some of their own investigators, but by and large, they're relying on the hundreds of FBI investigators that are taking part in this in some way or another. Most of the information that Congress is dealing with is coming directly from the FBI, while the FBI's head of that investigation just got knocked out.
Stephen Dynam, political editor of the Washington Times. We leave Washington, we'll be back there later, but we head now to the Manukau Memorial Gardens Cemetery in South Auckland. In the children's area of the cemetery, a maintenance worker or workers has caused damage across a large section of graves. Auckland Cemetery's manager, Catherine Moore, told me what she knows so far.
So on Monday, our contractors who do the mowing and gardening out at Manukau Memorial Gardens came in to do their usual mowing and line trimming. And on Tuesday, one of our families who have a child in our children's and babies area contacted us to say that there were a number of decorations that had basically been mowed over. So we obviously went out there and we've tidied up the area now. We've spoken to Downers, who are the contractor, and they've come out, had a look, and absolutely, they were as shocked and upset as we were, and have apologised and agree that it's completely unacceptable. So they're going to do an investigation and find out what on earth happened out here. And then in the meantime, we're just trying to get hold of families so that we can let them know what's happened.
Roughly how many graves are we talking about?
So there's about 170 graves in that area.
So this person who was mowing the lawns or doing whatever it was that they were doing didn't just go over a couple of graves, they just kept going over them.
Yes, so it's a lawn area, so there shouldn't be a huge number of decorations on the grass, but we do expect that where something has slipped off the edge of the concrete up by the headstone, that it's just put back in place and not hit with the mower on the way past.
And so we're talking about the sorts of things that are so sadly present on the graves of children and babies, which is toys and precious objects and things from the family and stuff, are we?
Absolutely. So soft toys, little teddy bears, flowers that family have been bought. There were a couple of wooden crosses and grave markers that are often used to mark the grave before the headstone is placed, because often families leave it a year or so before they place a headstone.
Right, yeah, absolutely. There's unveilings and all those sorts of things. Yes, so even wooden crosses were run over.
Well, there were a couple of wooden crosses that sort of ended out on the grass, so and some solar lights that were damaged and in the middle of the grass. So they must have been hit by the line trimmer or the mower. Otherwise, there's no other real explanation for how they would have.
I don't understand any explanation for this. I mean, if you are a contractor charged with mowing around children's graves where there are toys and precious objects and flowers and crosses and all that kind of stuff, it would seem to me that the most singular requirement would be not to smash and break and hit those things.
Absolutely, and look, I've spoken to someone from Downers Management, and they're as at a loss as you and I, and no doubt the families are as well. They have been our contractors out here for over 4 years, and we haven't had any of this before, so we're at a loss at the moment, but I agree. I think, you know, it's clearly a children's area. You can tell by the decorations that it's precious to these families. They've been through enough, the fact that they've had to bury one of their children, and, you know, they just don't need or deserve this on top of that.
So Downers are investigating?
So they're investigating, and they're going to get back to us.
How long would you expect that to take? I mean, it's one phone call, isn't it? You phone the man or woman who was driving this thing and you say, what the hell were you up to?
Well, I've had the phone call and the apology this afternoon, and they've been out to site. So I would expect to hear back from them either later this evening or tomorrow when they've got some kind of... but yes, I have no idea what that explanation would be.
Auckland Cemeteries Manager Catherine Moore. The inquiry into the Havelock North water contamination has found the Hawke's Bay Regional Council and Hastings District Council failed to protect public health. More than 5,000 people in Havelock North suffered gastrointestinal illness in August last year after their drinking water became contaminated. Some required hospitalisation, businesses were closed, schools shut, and retailers suffered significant financial cost. The inquiry reported back on stage 1 of its investigation this afternoon and found the cause of the Campylobacter outbreak was contaminated water from a pond near the Brookvale Road bores. No surprise there. The inquiry head, Lynn Stevens QC, says water from the pond was sucked into the aquifer and the Regional Council failed to meet its responsibilities.
This inquiry has found that several of the parties with responsibility for the water supply regime in Havelock North, in particular the District Council, the DWAs, the Hawke's Bay Regional Council, failed to adhere to the high standards of care and diligence necessary to protect public health and to avoid outbreaks of serious illness. A higher standard of care needed to be embraced, akin to that applied in the fields of medicine and aviation, where the consequences of failure could similarly be illness, injury or death.
Lynn Stevens QC, but the Hawke's Bay Regional Council Chairman Rex Graham says he disputes the inquiry's findings.
I'd like to read the report a little bit further and find out exactly how they arrived at a point that we failed to protect the public health. But from where I'm standing right now, without going into that detail, I would emphatically say that we've done everything that we have performed our duty to protect the public health.
Hawke's Bay Regional Council Chairman Rex Graham. Deborah Berlin was one of more than 5,000 people who were affected by the Campylobacter outbreak. In fact, her entire family fell ill. Her husband, 5-year-old daughter, 3-year-old son, and their baby, who was just 12 weeks old at the time. It was so painful, Deborah said it was similar to childbirth. She told us at the time she felt that her family had been poisoned and that they had been betrayed. So what does she think of the inquiry and its findings so far? She joins us on the phone. Deborah, it's lovely to talk to you again, and I'm hoping you're in better order than you were last time we spoke.
Much better, thank you. Yes, very well.
I'm delighted to hear it. God, you were crook. Your whole family was. So what do you make of the inquiry and what do you make of the response we just heard from Council then?
I don't feel like it's sufficient. They dispute it. Some people don't dispute it. I just feel that 9 months on, I don't feel like there's been much compensation.
Has there been so has there been any compensation? Has your family, all of you were crook, all of you had to stop working, all of you had to spend money on medical care. Has there been any compensation at all for you?
Well, apparently there's been $50 off our rates. However, we're still to see that. So I'm not sure. I've just been at swimming practice with my daughter. I've talked to other parents there. they own businesses. They feel like the council's definitely let them down. A lot of them have ongoing health issues, and there's financial support for that type of thing. There's been nothing. So I've actually listened to quite a few sides of it, and we feel like the council's definitely let us down. We've been paying rates, and we trusted in them to do their job, and they haven't done that.
In fact, you were poisoned, literally poisoned, by the municipal water supply. 5,000 people were made sick.
Correct, exactly.
So
there are long-term side effects for something like this, but there's no long-term type of compensation.
No, or even, in fact, a formal acknowledgement from the council. That,
exactly.
Yeah, right, exactly. So what would you like to see happen, Deborah?
I'd like to see them learn from it, probably be the main one, and to acknowledge where they've gone wrong, and to actually try and compensate in some shape or form the people that are actually still suffering, like the elderly or the people that had health issues that have been made worse by it and that are affected financially by it, and not just a measly $1,000 for advertising to get your business back to where it was. And
a $50 rates rebate that you haven't got yet.
Precisely.
Deborah Berlin, who was very sick along with her entire family at the time. Thank you, Deborah. It's lovely to talk to you again. If you are in or around Havelock North and you were crook at the time, we would love your response to the inquiry and the council's reaction to it. Text us 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. 29 to 6. Katrina next with the headlines. But before that, the Transport Agency says it will not deliberately kill any seals along the Kaikōura coastline, although a permit from the Department of Conservation gives them permission to. The agency obtained a permit to herd, injure and kill seals after State Highway 1 north of Kaikōura was damaged during the 7.8 magnitude earthquake last November. While the permit is already in use, the agency says it's being used as a means of protection, not as a way for it to get away with unnecessary force. Logan Church reports.
The South Island's east coast is a haven for seals, with breeding colonies on the rugged coastline a popular tourist attraction. But there were fears an entire colony was killed when the earthquake triggered a large slip at the Ohau Point Seal Sanctuary. However, some seals survived and have relocated, but a permit gives the Transport Agency and Kiwi Rail a get-out-of-jail-free card when it comes to harming them. It states they are authorised to kill, injure, herd or disturb seals that are disrupting construction work, overriding the Marine Mammals Act, which dictates they can't usually be touched. But the Transport Agency Recovery Manager, Steve Musson, says this gives people the wrong idea.
The Transport Agency Kiwi Rail would never kill a seal to reinstate the road and rail. This measure is in place here to enable us to go and move the seals out of harm's way.
The Department of Conservation Director General, Lou Sanson, says during the rebuild the seals can become accidental collateral damage.
So we're talking of masses of explosives, we're talking of seals coming in at this time of year. So we're allowing them to move the seals, and we know there have been accidental deaths, so we're basically saying we're not going to prosecute them.
And the department's South Island Operations Director, Roy Groves, says the harsh language in the permit is required by law.
While the wording in the permit is quite harsh, the majority of the work that they'll be carrying out under that permit is actually moving or herding seals out of the way when using big machinery.
The Transport Agency and Kiwi Rail approached the Department of Conservation after the earthquake and applied for a permit to be able to move seals if necessary. Steve Musson says there are already steps in place to keep seals safe.
We've put a number of measures in place to ensure that those seals are protected while we're doing our work. And that's everything from herding the seals away from our construction zones. We're trialling fences, putting them up to ensure the seals don't come back to where we're working. And we're also, every morning, we're putting helicopters in there that are flying low over the rocks to herd the seals away from where we're working.
Kaikōura's Mayor, Winston Gray, says reports in the media have given people the wrong impression, as the permit is only intended to allow workers to get the job done without fear of legal action.
I was very disappointed to read that. I thought it was sensationalism. It's about legislation. It read like it's open season on seals. What they're saying is they're not going to do that, I guess, but if they back over one on a machine or something, or a rockfall bolt takes one out, that no one's going to get sued or charged for that.
The permit lasts until March next year, but Steve Musson says the majority of the construction work will be done by Christmas. For Checkpoint, call Logan Church Tene.
Feedback already coming in on Havelock North inquiry and the water situation. The mind boggles. Yule re-elected. Graham denies democracy, eh? The buck stops where? Nowhere, says Evan Jones from Napier, from Taradale, in fact. Thank you, Evan. Coming up on the program, why tourism operators could soon be building tracks and huts in National Park. Edgecumbe retailers set up shop at home. And hailstones the size of baseballs in Colorado. We're also back in Washington for more on Trump and Comey later. But before all of that, here is Katrina Batten with the 5:30 headlines, only 5 minutes late.
The government says last year's gastro outbreak in Havelock North is unacceptable in a developed country. The inquiry has criticised both Hastings Council and Hawke's Bay Regional Council for failing to safeguard the town's drinking water. More than 5,000 people fell sick in August last year. The graves of at least 30 babies in Auckland have been damaged by contractors carrying out maintenance. The Auckland Council says toys and flowers on graves in the babies section. Let me say that again. The Auckland Council says toys and flowers on graves in the babies section on the western lawn of the Manukau Memorial Gardens were damaged during mowing of the surrounding lawns this week. The manager of Auckland Cemeteries, Catherine Moore, says it will contact affected families to discuss what happened. Federal prosecutors in the United States have issued grand jury subpoenas to associates of the former National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn. The move is part of the ongoing probe of alleged Russian meddling in last year's election. The subpoenas seeking business records were received by associates who worked with Mr. Flynn on contracts after he was forced out as director of the Defence Intelligence Agency in 2014. A tourism leader says laws may have to be changed to allow the Department of Conservation and private operators to make money from conservation land. Tourism industry Aotearoa is calling for the government to make it easier for private firms to invest in new attractions on the conservation estate. It says private sector investors could build new tracks and run huts as a business, while DOC should be able to control visitors and charge on popular tracks. A witness has told a court in Auckland he was shocked when he was told that he needed to put a woman in the boot of his car. So Varanith-ing is giving evidence by closed-circuit television to a closed court where 6 people are on trial for charges, including kidnapping and the manslaughter of 50-year-old Indirat Prutsiriporn. Ms. Prutsiriporn died after falling from the boot of a moving car in South Auckland last year. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6 in 23 minutes.
Yeah, not very far away. Just go and sit over there at the end of the table. Yeah. Make a cup of tea. Let's get to business news now. Jonathan Mitchell is in the chair again tonight from Wellington. Hi, Jono. Consumers are being slightly cautious with their spending?
That's right. We've had the monthly electronic cards data out, which gives quite a good indication of what's happening with consumers. This is the credit, debit and charge cards. It can be volatile month to month, but in April it rose 1.1% on a fairly flat March result. Consumers are willing to spend more on items around the home, like furniture, so renovations are continuing and at restaurants and bars, but there's been a bit of a pullback in fuel and on clothing. So the data indicates, because it's quite volatile, that households might be just a bit more restrained with their spending using cards. High levels of household debt, a concern for the Reserve Bank might be coming into play here, as well as rising mortgage rates as well. So in any case, the data is still quite positive. It gives a good tick for the economy, but maybe some constraint and restraint coming in from consumers here.
Let's stay with interest rates. The Reserve Bank makes a call on the official cash rate tomorrow, does it, Jonathan?
That's right. We're expecting the Reserve Bank to hold the official cash rate at a record low 1.75%. But what's more interesting about tomorrow is the monetary policy statement and the updated economic forecasts. Since we last heard from the Reserve Bank of New Zealand a couple of months ago, inflation has picked back up to that midpoint 2% of the key target band. Dairy prices have recovered, and there's been a steady stream of economic numbers come through. So the previous forecasts were for a fairly static interest rate period up until about late 2019, but there could be some movement forward in that calendar for when there could be a next rate move. All will be revealed tomorrow. There'll be a number of factors at play, geopolitical risks overseas as well with the United States, Britain's decision to leave the European Union, and of course Britain's election next month. So we'll get more detail from the Reserve Bank tomorrow. And we've got our man on the scene, Giles Beckford. He'll be in tomorrow morning to update you on that.
Thank you so much. That's our morning report, and we'll talk to you about it tomorrow night too, Jonathan. What's happening on the markets?
The top 50 index gained 12 points, ending the day at 7,424, and the dollar fairly steady, just hovering around 69 US cents and just under 94 Australian.
Jonathan Mitchell beaming in from Wellington. Thanks, Jono. Tourism operators could soon be building tracks and huts in national parks as part of a push for more private investment in activities on conservation land. They're calling on the government to cut the barriers to private sector investment in new attractions on the conservation estate, but they also want more done about deteriorating fresh water and creating a predator-free New Zealand. Now, tourism is the country's largest foreign exchange earner. It's worth a total of $35 billion, employing more than 320,000 people. Operators say the dock estate is an important part of the sector, but it's struggling to cope with record tourists, up 12% to 3.5 million people last year. This is a big old issue. Sharon Brett-Kelly is having a look at it for us.
Thousands of tourism operators already make money from running businesses on conservation land, but more want to invest and they want it to be easier. Tourism industry Aotearoa Chief Chris Roberts says the priority is to protect landscapes and wildlife as the cash-strapped Department of Conservation struggles to cope with record tourists.
It doesn't all have to be on the shoulders of DOC to develop the next track, build the next hut, provide the next car parking. The private sector can get involved.
The call is part of the group's election year manifesto, released at the annual tourism conference Trends in Auckland. Chris Roberts says private sector investors could build new tracks and run huts as a business, while DOC should be able to control visitors and charge on popular tracks. But that could mean a law change.
It is going to need a full review of the Conservation Act. Not to try and override any conservation values, that's certainly not the intention, but to give DOC more flexibility.
And Mr Roberts says there would have to be strict rules.
We've probably all experienced overseas, and personally climbed to the top of Mount Sinai in the desert where Moses received the 10 Commandments, and at the top there are people selling you Coca-Cola. Now, we don't want to see that in New Zealand.
James Fitzgerald's Rotorua Canopy Tours makes money running zipline tours on conservation land. His 5-year-old company has spent $300,000 on removing pests like possums from the Mamaku Plateau.
If we didn't exist, that forest would still be sitting there, underutilised, underknown, uncared for, and in extreme poor state. With the rats and possums overrunning it, and because we're there, it has been turned around.
The new head of Tourism New Zealand, Stephen England Hall, says the conservation estate needs investment.
It costs money to run a third of our country, and so that has to come from somewhere. I don't know if it's a commercialisation activity rather than a perpetualisation of conservation, because conservation costs money, and so I think we have to find a way to do that.
Air New Zealand's chief executive Christopher Luxon last year called for a national parks charge on overseas tourists to help cover the cost of infrastructure such as car parks and toilets. The government has resisted it so far, but he says it could still happen.
I think we're all quite excited to see Minister Bennett here tomorrow, and actually it'll be very interesting to see what she's got to say. Certainly the DOC estate's a really important piece of investment for New Zealand as well, and I think we would hope that the government will be considering the local mixed-use piece, but obviously also funding for DOC as well, and what they can do to make sure that we get the asset in the shape that it needs to be in for the future.
He says the sector could be worth $9 billion more, but infrastructure needs to be upgraded and tourism leaders need to be smarter. I Tamaki Makoto mō te hotaka o te ahi ko Sharon Brett-Kelly aho.
Lots of talk there about DOC and predators. Well, the government's plan to halt the decline of native species has been described as underwhelming and lacking the necessary funds to make a difference. The Department of Conservation has released its draft strategy on how it intends to tackle the loss of biodiversity and restore threatened species like the kakapo and moe dolphin to healthy populations. Our environment reporter Kate Gudsell has more.
The government's plan to deal with what it calls the country's unenviable record of extinction includes improving the populations of 150 priority species in the next 8 years. Kakapo, takahe, maui and Hector's dolphins, the longfin eel and the great white shark are on the priority list. The strategy builds on the predator-free 2050 plan. DOC's Director General Lou Sanson says the department makes no apologies for the amount of 1080 it's using to control the predators, and says another large drop is coming in the North Island.
Large parts of New Zealand we're bringing back species in big numbers. In Kaka in the southwestland, we've got 20% of the Kia habitat in the South Island now with sustained 1080 control, which is leading to a recovery in Kia. So that will save Kia, but we're going to need thousands of volunteers.
Lou Sanson says DOC spends $180 million each year on biodiversity initiatives and gets another $100 million from community partnerships with companies like Air New Zealand. Jacqueline Beggs is an Associate Professor of Conservation Biology at the University of Auckland. The Endangered Species Foundation board member is disappointed there isn't any new money in the package.
To be honest, I was slightly underwhelmed in the sense that I was hoping that there would be an announcement of some funding that would make all the difference to implementing what is trying to be achieved here. 800
native species in New Zealand are classified as threatened and facing extinction. Dr. Beggs says that's a huge number of species in serious trouble, and bold, quick action is needed to save just a fraction of those.
The government has to step up too and invest strongly in this area, because you need a core of expertise that the Department of Conservation can provide, and that has to be funded well. And so I think for me, that's the bit that is missing.
Forest and Birds Chief Executive Kevin Haig says it's great that the government has a recovery plan, but he reckons it's unambitious with no real resourcing behind it. He says his members up and down the country, as well as people who interact with DOC regularly, all report the department's ability to tackle the problem has been seriously eroded. He says it's able to do less, and others are being required to step in.
I'm strongly supportive of community partnerships, and I think it's great if businesses do actually want to donate some money to help with conservation efforts, but those need to be on top of the core conservation work that the public needs the Department of Conservation to be able to do. They should be the icing, not the cake.
The Conservation Minister, Maggie Barry, says extra resources will be announced over the next few weeks.
So for those who are wanting to take the DOC underfunded track, you could probably pull back on that. The fact that the DOC has increased its funding over the last 8 years under this national-led government by 18%. There are significant gains, as Lou has outlined, around partnerships, collaboration and philanthropic money.
Ms Barry says the Crown cannot be expected to fund every single project itself. Kevin Haig thinks any new funding will go towards helping DOC deal with the impact of tourism, not its core conservation functions. Submissions on the threatened species strategy close at the end of July, with the final strategy released in August. For Checkpoint, Ko Kate Godsall-Tene.
We're going to Edgecumbe next, but just before that, officials in Denver, Colorado say a hailstorm that struck yesterday could be one of the most catastrophic in the state's history. Hailstones described as being as big as baseballs pelted the west of the state, breaking car windows, denting car bonnets, damaging buildings and forcing businesses to close. This woman who was driving at the time described the impact.
I could sometimes feel as other cars would pass, it would kind of rock my car a little bit. There was just like waves of it coming.
The bad weather also brought heavy rain and flooding, and more hail is forecast for the week. Officials say this week's series of storms may be categorised as one weather event and could be more costly than a similar event 8 years ago, when storms struck Colorado across 9 consecutive days, costing more than $200 million in damage. Let's go to Edgecumbe now, where businesses are struggling to get back on their feet, with one reporting that his turnover has halved since the floods. As the clean-up of the town's 250-odd flood-damaged homes continues, local firms are trying to get back to business as usual. Easier said than done. Tom Furley is in Edgecumbe.
Nick's Auto Services is doing it tough at the moment because many Edgecumbe residents' cars were put out of action by last month's flooding. Its owner and manager, Steve McElroy, says he could miss out on tens of thousands of dollars.
We were shut for 3 weeks. As far as any support goes, we get nothing, absolutely nothing. We weren't affected by the water coming into our premises, but I would guess probably 50-60% of my business was from that side of town, a little bit on this side, and as you can see, there's nothing left. there's nobody there. So most of my business is now gone.
Mr McElroy says given his business wasn't directly affected by the disaster, he's not hopeful he'll get any help from the government's $250,000 support package or his insurer.
Insurance company aren't interested because it physically didn't affect our business, as in water hasn't gone through it. In their eyes, there was no reason for us to not reopen, but you can't reopen when you're locked out of town for 3 weeks. So we get no help whatsoever. We just got to rely on our reserves.
Shops in the Riversley Mall in the centre of Edgecumbe were fully flooded and it now sits empty. Eastern Bay Curtains for You was among a number of businesses to have thigh-high water destroy most of its stock. Its owner, Paula Hind, says she's unsure when she can return and she's now set up shop at home.
We've got jobs in the bedroom, we've got samples in the dining room, we've got stock out in the garage. We're a bit spread out with things everywhere.
Her insurer will cover the lost stock and fixing her shop, but she says her business has taken a huge hit. Ms Hind says she's hoping to take up the government's business support package. The operations manager at Pepper's Building Supplies, Sherelle Stevenson, says that support is welcomed, but rebuilding business is the key.
We aren't relying on the business relief package that the government's put together for us because we can't. The detail is still to be nutted out, and to be sustainable we can't rely on that. We've just got to keep busy, keep moving, and try and pick up as much business as we can.
And Sherelle Stevenson says the town's rebuild may not benefit locals.
The insurers are getting out-of-town builders who already have their own merchants that they deal with. So as a big supporter of our local community, it's kind of bittersweet to see people coming in with their own building material and, I suppose, in a way, profiteering off our own tragedy.
Some business owners say they're thinking about the business support package but need more information. They'll have a chance to put some of their questions at a community meeting this evening. In Edgecumbe for Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
A witness thumped on the desk in front of him as he tried to describe the noise coming from the boot of his car where kidnapped woman Jindara Prutsiripon was being held. Sovanarathing was giving evidence by closed-circuit television in the High Court in Auckland. Ms Prutsiripon died from a serious head injury after falling from the boot of a moving car in the South Auckland suburb of Papatoetoe in March last year. 6 men are on trial for charges including kidnapping and the manslaughter of the 50-year-old. Our Auckland court reporter Edward Gay has been covering the trial. Hi, Eddie. Mr Ing's day started with a long drive, the court heard.
That's right. He told the court that he agreed to drive a man that he knew as Soda and Soda's friend Jack into town, and he's confirmed Soda is actually Soda Itsao, and he's admitted already charges of kidnapping and manslaughter on the morning before the trial. Jack's been identified as Sing Lek Liu, and that's the man the Crown says actually was behind the kidnapping. He decided this kidnapping should take place, and he employed the ghost unit. After stopping to get a flat tyre fixed, a bit of petrol, they headed out west to a motel that's later been established to be in Parakai. And he said that Jack met a man in the motel unit. They then drove back into Auckland, but this time they headed to Mangere.
He didn't know what was going on, did he? At least that's what he's saying in court.
Yeah, that's right. He said that Jack then asked him if he wanted to know what they were up to, and he said, it's none of my business, mate, I don't want to know. But he said that once they got to this house in Mangere, another guy closed the curtains. He thought something to do with drugs was about to take place. They also got back in the car and they drove around the block to make sure there were no police in the area. But then back at the house, he was introduced to a man that he described as the most ugly man he had seen. And it was at that point that Jack told him that they needed to put a Thai woman in the boot of his car. He said that he told Jack that he was a family man, he had kids. He even pleaded to lose his life. He didn't want to have any part in this. He said he was shocked and terrified.
But Mr Jack said he had no choice, right? Or at least that's what's being alleged, is it?
Again, yeah, that's Mr Ing's evidence. He told the court that he was worried about the woman screaming. Jack, in answer to this, said that the woman was tied up, she couldn't make any noise. He also offered Ing some methamphetamine. Ing said he declined, and he actually said he threw his keys on the ground. He said he didn't want to drive the car with the woman in the boot. Eventually, he said, Ms Prutsiripon was put in the boot of his car, and his car was actually driven by another man to another house. And after some hours at this house, sitting around drinking beers in the garage, he heard this banging noise coming from the boot. He said he told his mate Soda, take the car, get it out of here. And so Soda did take off. He said Soda looked pretty scared. And earlier, actually, and this is at the point where the Crown says Miss Pritsitipon was able to break out of the car once the car took off. Now, earlier he confirmed that he worked as a butcher and he kept knives and a sharpening steel in the boot of his car, and it's these implements that the Crown says were with Miss Pritsitipon when she came out of the boot. She fell from the moving car, and days later she died in hospital.
The trial is continuing. Edward Gale, court reporter. Thanks so much, Eddie. Appreciate it. The Liberal human rights lawyer Moon Jae-in has claimed victory in South Korea's presidential election. Ballots are still being counted, but exit polls suggest he's won at least 40% of the vote, easily beating his nearest rivals. The BBC's Steve Evans reports on the challenges Mr Moon is likely to face.
Moon Jae-in congratulated on his way to victory tonight. The man taking South Korea to the left and perhaps closer to North Korea. He wants to talk to Pyongyang. Voters have backed him by a big margin. They went to the polls in large numbers, a turnout of around 80%. The issues, the economy, of course. Young people worry about jobs and whether to confront or talk to North Korea.
As a person who's going to military in just a few years, I don't want to live in a country where it is at a risk of breaking out a war, or me actually having to go into the war with North Korea.
I think I'm not really that much different from most people. For me, national security is also the main point of concern. When the leading presidential candidate of the country is saying that he wants to resume talks with North Korea, that really is a concern to a lot of us.
Turnout is very high in this election. People have been galvanized by politics with the sacking of the previous president. And the issues are so big. This is not a country which is fed up with democracy. Mr. Moon doesn't like the American anti-missile system just installed in South Korea. He favors increased cooperation with Pyongyang. So will left of centre Moon Jae-in get on with President Trump? A new, softer approach in Seoul might not please Washington.
The report from the BBC. We're going to return to Havelock North now, where the inquiry into last year's water contamination has found the Hawke's Bay Regional Council and Hastings District Council failed to protect public health. Resident Deborah Berlin, who we heard from earlier on the program, told us her entire family fell ill with Campylobacter. She's yet to receive the promised $50 rates rebate as compensation. We've just got Mayor Lawrence Yule on the phone. We're going to try and get some information out of Mayor Yule before 6 o'clock. Welcome back to the program, Mayor Yule. Where's the rebate?
Well, I see no reason why she hasn't got the rebate, so we'll arrange that to happen. Okay. Everybody should have got it. I've got no. That's in the scheme of this. That's a simple thing to fix.
Did you hear Hawke's Bay Regional Council Chairman Rex Graham disputing the inquiry's findings earlier on?
No,
have you heard him saying that elsewhere?
No.
Okay, so he's disputing the inquiry's findings. What do you make of the inquiry's findings? What do you make of Rex Graham disputing them?
Well, I don't know what Rex Graham has said, but we've been very clear. We actually accept the findings. I sat for days through those hearings, and I listened to the various submissions. And in my view, the panel have done a very good job of summarising that and coming up with these findings. So we've got no reason to dispute them.
OK, so where does the buck stop? Because, look, we all know this, but it's worth remembering that 5,000 people were sick, some of them so sick they were hospitalised. A town was effectively closed down, schools were closed, business was closed, business lost money, retailers lost money. Who's resigned? Whose head has rolled?
Well, nobody's head has rolled. And that's not to play down the significance of this. It was massive. And there was a lot of misery caused. 3 people died with Campylobacter, even though it wasn't necessarily the cause of their death. So that is not lost on me or my councillors. But what the panel has found is that none of the failings that have been identified across multiple agencies, including my own, the Hastings District Council, the Regional Council, an engineering consultancy firm, and the drinking water assessors, led to the contamination. So it's a combination. It's what they call the Swiss cheese model, where a whole lot of little things go wrong. None of them deliberate, but it allowed this contamination to occur.
The Labor Party is saying that they want you to resign. Of course, you are also a national candidate in the upcoming election, aren't you?
Yeah, well, the Labor Party may well say that for political reasons, but I want to be very clear. I have stood with this community from the start of this contamination. I have said I'll stay in this role to hear the contamination findings in the inquiry today. And importantly, we are currently in consultation with our community about a $12 million spend to put UV treatment systems in the other parts of the Hastings network, and that is going to be signed off the day before I vacate the chair as mayor of this council. And I'm sticking by that because that's what I've been elected to do, and that's what I intend to carry out.
Mayor Lawrence Hill joining us very quickly before the 6 o'clock news as a result of what Rex Graham and Deborah Berlin were saying earlier in the program. It is coming up to 6 o'clock after Katrina, the pips, the news and all of that stuff. We'll be back in Washington. Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. The government says last year's gastro outbreak in Havelock North is unacceptable in a first world country. A report released today has criticised both the Hastings District Council and Hawke's Bay Regional Council for failing to safeguard the town's drinking water. It found neither had substantial plans in place to deal with the contamination, which was likely caused by sheep faeces. More than 5,000 people fell sick in August last year after the water supply was contaminated. It may have contributed to 3 deaths. The Attorney-General, Chris Finlayson, says all councils should take note of the findings.
All local authorities need immediately, not wait till stage 2, immediately check their processes. There is nothing more fundamental to the citizens of this country than clean water.
Chris Finlayson says the report is highly critical but won't say where the head should roll. The Regional Council's chair, Rex Graham, disagrees with the findings, saying he feels it performed its duty to protect public health. It's been confirmed that federal prosecutors in the United States have issued grand jury subpoenas to associates of the former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. The move is part of the ongoing probe of alleged Russian meddling in last year's election. The subpoenas are seeking business records and are the first significant escalation of activity since the FBI's investigation began last July. The subpoenas were received by associates who worked with Mr. Flynn on contracts after he was forced out as director of the Defence Intelligence Agency in 2014. The confirmation comes soon after the President, Donald Trump, fired the FBI Director James Comey for misleading Congress last week into testimony relating to Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server. A tourism leader says laws may have to be changed to allow the Department of Conservation and private operators to make money from conservation land. Tourism industry Aotearoa is calling for the government to make it easier for private firms to invest in new attractions on the conservation estate. The Chief Executive, Chris Roberts, made the calls as part of the group's election year manifesto, released today at the tourist industry conference Trends. He says private sector investors could build new tracks and run huts as a business, while DOC should be able to control visitors and charge on popular tracks. Mr. Roberts says the Conservation Act might have to change. He says the priority is to protect the environment and wildlife as DOC struggles to cope with record tourists. Decorations on the graves of at least 30 babies in Auckland have been damaged by contractors carrying out maintenance. The City Council says a mower operated by Downer damaged toys and flowers that were left on the edges of the graves at the western lawn of the Manukau Memorial Gardens on Monday. The manager of Auckland Cemeteries, Catherine Moore, says it's disappointing Downer didn't tell them about the damage before it was found by family members visiting a grave on Tuesday.
Downers have been out here today and looked at the area and the photos that we've taken. They've apologised and they accept that, it's totally unacceptable.
Catherine Moore says Downer is investigating and any broken items will be replaced. A driver is in a critical condition in hospital after a brief police pursuit in North Otago. They say they briefly pursued a car that had been speeding on State Highway 1 near Palmerston at 4:20 this afternoon. It crossed the centre line about 2 minutes later, crashed and rolled off the road. The police say the driver had to be flown to Dunedin Hospital by helicopter because of the seriousness of the injuries. The road is not blocked. The Independent Police Conduct Authority is being advised. A witness has described hearing a boom boom noise coming from the boot of his car where a kidnapped woman was being held. So Varanith Ing was giving evidence from an unknown location by CCTV to a closed court in the High Court in Auckland. 6 men are on trial for charges including kidnapping and the manslaughter of Jindarat Prutsiriporn. The 50-year-old died from a serious head injury after falling from a moving car in the South Auckland suburb of Papatoetoe in March last year. At one point, Mr. Ing thumped on the desk in front of him to describe the bang. Mr. Ing, who has immunity from prosecution, said another man drove his car off and looked scared. He's previously told the court that he kept a knife and a chef's steel in the boot. The Crown says Miss Prutsiriporn stashed a knife down the front of her trousers and used a chef's steel to prise the boot open. It's 6:05. To sport, and Wallabies coach Michael Cheika says Australia can still challenge the All Blacks this season, despite the nation's abysmal record against New Zealand teams in Super Rugby this year. The 5 Australian sides have lost all 17 rugby matches against their New Zealand counterparts. Cheika says there's a lot of work to be done before the two sides play the Bledisloe Cup opener in August, but he believes in his players. The Warriors boss, Jim Doyle, is anxious that departing player Kieran Foran get plenty of support when he returns to Sydney for the 2018 National Rugby League season. Foran will join the Canterbury Bulldogs on a 3-year deal, but Doyle is concerned the 26-year-old is returning to Sydney prematurely, having come to the Warriors this year to get away from a series of personal problems. However, Foran is confident a return to Sydney won't lead to a downward spiral in his personal life.
I've done a lot of work on myself over the last 7 months since I've been here, and I'm a lot stronger person. I'm a lot more comfortable person, and I've got no doubt in my mind that when I return to Sydney next year that I'll be fine.
Warriors player Kieran Foran. Football's Paul Pogba's world record transfer from Juventus to Manchester United last year is under investigation by World Football governing body FIFA. FIFA wants to know who was involved in the $157 million transfer and how much money was paid to them. That's the news.
An Edgecumbe resident who won't go back.
7 people come to my door and I'm trying to get some clothes on and screaming at me to get out, get out.
Partnership schools hit back at Labour.
They've got no idea what partnership schools are all about. You can't go around making sort of claims about what we do or don't do if you aren't bothered to come and check and have a look yourself.
Will Labour backtrack?
You don't want an angry Willie inside your party because that'll very shortly or very soon turn on you.
Turn on your radio. Morning reports from 6 a.m. weekdays with Guy Aspinall and Susie Ferguson. Then on 9 to noon, radical new proposals for the long-term protection of our waterways. And after 10, rising business star Cassandra Crowley on the growing potential of the iwi-led economy. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waikato and Bay of Plenty. A few showers turning to rain tomorrow with localised downpours from evening. Waitomo to Taranaki and central high country. Fine at first, a few showers developing this evening, turning to rain tomorrow with downpours from afternoon. Whanganui to Wellington, also Gisborne to Wairarapa. Mainly fine today with high cloud. Rain spreading from the west tomorrow, briefly heavy. Nelson and the Marlborough Sounds, rain with heavy falls, clearing tomorrow evening. For the remainder of Marlborough, patchy rain becoming heavy for a time tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, periods of rain, heavy at times with possible thunderstorms, easing to a few showers tomorrow afternoon. Canterbury and Otago, areas of cloud or fog today, scattered rain developing overnight, then clearing tomorrow afternoon. Southland and Fiordland, fine today, scattered showers tomorrow. And the Chatham Islands, fine spells with drizzle tomorrow night. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina Batten. Nice work. Democrats are accusing Donald Trump of obstruction of justice after he fired the FBI director who was leading the investigation into the Trump's campaign's alleged ties to Russia. The president says he ousted James Comey over his handling of an election year scandal involving Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server. But Democrats and some Republicans say they're dismayed by his decision to remove the top US law enforcement official at a sensitive moment in the Russia probe. From Washington, Simon Marks reports.
This was a bolt from the blue, and not even the FBI Director James Comey saw it coming. He was in Los Angeles preparing to address an event at which the FBI was seeking new recruits when a Trump official handed him a letter saying that his career with the Bureau was over. We knew something was up earlier in the day when White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer was asked whether President Trump still had confidence in Mr. Comey.
I have no reason to believe. I haven't asked him, so I have not asked the president since the last time we spoke about this.
That did not sound good, and now we know that behind the scenes the die was cast. The president justifying his decision based on a memo he received from top Justice Department officials who say the FBI director was wrong last summer when he failed to prosecute Hillary Clinton over her use of a private email server when she was Secretary of State. Wrong, in other words, to ignore the demands of those Trump supporters who throughout the campaign insisted of Mrs. Clinton that it was time to lock her up. Democrats smelled an immediate rat. They accused President Trump of obstructing justice by derailing the career of the FBI chief investigating the Trump team's alleged collusion with Russia during last year's election. The top Democrat in the Senate, Charles Schumer.
We know the FBI has been looking into whether the Trump campaign colluded with the Russians. A very serious offense. Were these investigations getting too close to home for the president?
The White House insisted there's nothing to see here. Spokeswoman Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who on numerous occasions has lied to reporters on a wide range of issues, told Fox News it's time for everyone to stop digging into the Russia allegations. And she justified Mr. Comey's firing.
Look, I think it's real simple. Director Comey had lost the confidence of the rank and file within the FBI. He'd certainly, I think, lost the confidence from members of both sides, Republicans and Democrats in the House and the Senate. And frankly, most importantly, Tucker, he lost the confidence of the American people.
But there is no evidence any of that is true, and the White House appears to have been shaken by the scale of the reaction to Mr. Comey's dismissal. Even several leading Republicans in the US Senate expressed their dismay with the president's decision, calling Mr. Comey a committed public servant. A man excoriated by Democrats for reopening the investigation into Mrs. Clinton's email just days before last November's election, contributing, they say, to her election demise, is now being lionized by them as a victim of President Trump's determination to derail the Russia investigation at all costs. For Checkpoint, I'm Simon Marks in Washington.
And a short time ago, I spoke to our correspondent Lorna Shattuck in New York about James Comey's firing, starting with the timing of it.
Well, it's fascinating timing, isn't it, first of all? And it's just being reported here in the US by various media outlets that, in fact, this has come as the FBI was issuing subpoenas to various people involved or potentially involved in that investigation into potential collusion with Russia, especially with regard to Michael Flynn, of course, the former national security advisor who was fired. So that timing certainly seems interesting. But, of course, it also comes after a pretty dire day yesterday, Monday, for the White House when Sally Yates, that former acting Attorney General, who, as you'll remember, was also fired by Donald Trump, gave testimony in Congress and gave some pretty damning or certainly problematic testimony as far as the White House was concerned when it came to the firing of Michael Flynn and why they had not acted on her advice and got rid of him earlier. So some pretty bad headlines for Mr. Trump swirling about here. And it seems that his mood when it comes to Director Comey has changed dramatically, because you will remember that when Director Comey reopened that investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails just a few days before the election last year, Mr. Trump could not praise him highly enough and went on to talk about how he had done the right thing. Now it seems that both Mr. Trump and his Attorney General will say actually it was Mr. Comey's handling of that very affair that is why he's now been sacked. So certainly a big switcheroo from Mr. Trump and his administration here.
So Sally Yates putting the boot in, Michael Flynn being subpoenaed, the wagons circling, the vultures circling, however you like to describe it, in terms of the Russia probe, and Trump sacks the head of the FBI, leaving the Russia probe where?
Well, that is now the big question, and you will see that Chuck Schumer, the head of the Democrats in the Senate Minority Leader, has come out already and called for a special independent prosecutor to be appointed to continue the work of that investigation and to take it forward. And he's been backed up by several other Democrats, including Senator Elizabeth Warren. And indeed, even the head of the Senate Intelligence Committee, who is a Republican, while not going so far as to call yet for an independent prosecutor, has already come out and criticised this decision and praised Director Comey and his work. And that is potentially key, because it is the existence of his committee, the Senate Intelligence Committee, that many Republicans have used as an excuse for not appointing a special prosecutor. They say, well, look, this Intelligence Committee is already investigating what's going on. We do not need a separate independent investigation. But if the head of that committee is troubled by the firing of James Comey, then that could lead potentially to some wiggle room. However, of course, that could potentially be very problematic for the White House. So it will be interesting to see what happens. But in the meantime, of course, President Trump will have to appoint a successor to James Comey, and that successor will have to be confirmed by the Senate, by 51 senators. And if they choose to, the Democrats could potentially make life quite difficult for President Trump and whoever he decides to appoint as James Comey's successor, as indeed they did when it came to appointing someone on the Supreme Court, Neil Gorsuch, when they decided to try and block that. And the Republicans had to change the voting rules in order to get Neil Gorsuch through. So it's possible they might want to end up having to do the same thing again here as well.
And at the very top of the ladder, the successor that Trump and the White House have to appoint is also going to be the person in charge of the inquiry into the White House's links with Russia. So this is an extraordinary state of affairs. And what makes it even more bizarre is, of course, Comey had been vilified by the left because the left believe that his mishandled inquiry into Clinton's emails directly cost Hillary Clinton the presidency. So how is anyone making any sense of this in Washington?
Well, it is fascinating, isn't it? And when this news came out, it must have been a sort of bittersweet and strange moment for many Hillary Clinton supporters. Even just last week, she was making some public remarks, some rare public remarks about the election, and said that certainly she feels a large part of why she lost back last November was because of that reopening of the email investigation by James Comey just 11 days before Americans went to the polls, and when in fact many of them were already casting early ballots in that election. So a strange moment for them, because in some ways they've had the knives out for. And indeed, the Trump administration has pointed that out. They have said, well, look, you haven't exactly had good words to say about this man for a long time. And President Trump, in fact, recently just tweeted that Chuck Schumer had talked about, Chuck Schumer being the Senate Minority Leader, had talked about not having confidence in James Comey. So those words are now being thrown back in their faces. But what the Democrats, of course, will say is no, but for a president to use his power to fire an FBI director who is directly investigating his campaign's potential links with Russia is potentially unconstitutional, and they have big fears about it. Nonetheless, I'm sure there will be some Democrats who perhaps won't be all that sad to see James Comey go. So a very strange moment in Washington.
Ain't that the truth? Lorna Shattuck. Hastings Mayor Lawrence Yuill says he won't resign over the highly critical report into the contamination of Havelock North's drinking water. A government inquiry has found the Hastings Council and Hawke's Bay Regional Council failed to safeguard the water. The Labor Party is calling for Mr Yuill to resign before he stands down to campaign as a national candidate in the upcoming general election. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
The inquiry follows a gastrobug outbreak in August last year that affected more than 5,000 people in the town and may have contributed to 3 deaths. In initial findings released this afternoon, Inquiry Chair Lynn Stevens says the council's failed on several counts. He says the District Council made mistakes in its assessment of the risks, and mid-level managers delegated tasks but didn't properly supervise them or make sure they were carried out. He says that led to unacceptable delays to the preparation of a water safety plan. The Attorney-General, Chris Finlayson, says last year's gastro outbreak in Havelock North was unacceptable in a first-world country. He's warning all councils to take note of the findings.
All local authorities need immediately, not wait till stage 2, immediately check their processes. There is nothing more fundamental to the citizens of this country than clean water.
Labor's Environment spokesperson David Parker says the report is shocking.
The District Council, who are the suppliers of water through people's taps, have known for many, many years that there are risks of contamination, and despite that they've not been treating their water. Secondly, they find that the aquifer that the bores go into, unbeknownst to either the district council or the regional council, through their negligence really, they didn't know that a surface water from rain onto the effluent from sheep gets into the aquifer and poisons the water.
Chris Finlayson says the report is highly critical, but won't say whether heads should roll.
The good thing is there's a joint working group in operation now, and I think that the regional council and the district council are working much better together, but there's no compromise to be had. We expect high standards. Well, not high standards, the highest standards.
David Parker says Lawrence Yule should do the right thing.
The local mayor has been there for 16 years. He, I think, has to take substantial responsibility for the failure of the organisation that he's in charge of with his council, and he should be resigning. Instead, what he's doing is standing for the National Party at the next election. I'm aghast at that.
The report confirmed sheep faeces were the likely source of the contamination. Atu e te whare pārimata mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Chris Bramalaho.
80% of New Zealanders who move from renting to first-time home ownership face a huge struggle to do so. That's according to a new government measure which shows how much money people have left over after their housing costs. Now, the government says the new data will help policymakers monitor the housing market in more detail. What does it tell us? Eric Frickberg reports.
The measure, which only goes up to June 2015, shows that if you try to move from renting to owning, 81% of you will slip below an average level of prosperity of $662 a week. That's after accommodation costs are paid for a single person, and the figure was set 4 years ago. But if you cut your losses and keep on renting, the costs will be marginally cheaper, but 66% of you will still remain below the economic norm. These views echo what the economist Jacob has been saying for years.
Home ownership is extraordinarily difficult for young people. House prices have increased much faster than incomes, and rents are relatively expensive. Very difficult for young people to not only save a deposit, but to also make repayments.
Mr. Jacob says the figures underline that home affordability is deteriorating for many young people.
There is no denial that home ownership is extraordinarily difficult. The majority of New Zealanders are now missing out and will not get better unless we can unite and fix the housing crisis.
A senior analyst at the ministry, James Kerr, says the housing crisis is being probed more deeply by his department's latest research.
The big thing this does is it tells us more about housing affordability rather than anything fundamentally different. We can look at things in much more detail than has been possible up until now.
That detail will eventually cover varying house prices and varying incomes, and even individual figures for each Auckland suburb. The Minister of Housing, Nick Smith, welcomes that level of information.
The advantage of this index is it provides far more stratified information, specifically for renters, specifically for first home buyers, and specifically in individual wards or districts.
Dr. Smith says this will help the government work with councils to improve housing problems. A senior social analyst at the Salvation Army, Alan Johnson, says while renters appear better off than buyers, they're not.
The picture painted for tenant households is not particularly rosy because effectively it says that 2/3 of tenant households really are struggling to pay the rent. It's well to measure how many tenant households can move into home ownership. And when you say that 2/3 of tenant households can't afford to pay rent, they really don't have anywhere else to go but to pay the rent.
Both Alan Johnson and Shamabeel Jacob thinks this problem should have been dealt with by governments years ago. For Checkpoint, Eric Frickberg.
Let's go to Dunedin now, where residents say the city's first five-star hotel will block their view, and it's not right. Tourists can have a better one so that they don't get one at all. Submissions closed today on the 17-storey modern hotel, which would sit behind the city's heritage buildings in the Octagon. People in favour of the project say it will revive Dunedin's dying CBD. Lydia Anderson has been talking to locals on both sides of the debate.
The height and modern design of the proposed Moray Place Hotel has some residents worried. At around 64 metres high, it would be significantly taller than the current 11-metre limit imposed on the chosen site, which is currently a car park. Meg Davidson made a submission on behalf of the City Rise Up group, which represents residents and businesses in the CBD. She says it's out of keeping with the city's heritage buildings and would obstruct residents' views of the city.
It's such a blot on the landscape, put it that way, and it has nothing to do with the way our members see Dunedin, which is primarily as a great small city that relies on its heritage for its appeal to not only residents but visitors.
It's not the first time a five-star design has been proposed for the city. In 2014, a 27-storey waterfront design attracted almost 500 submissions in opposition, and its resource consent was rejected. Submitter Peter Entwistle doesn't think the new proposal is much better.
Well, I suppose because it's 10 stories less, we should be grateful or something, but it's the same kind of ill-conceived idea. You know, if he wants to have a hotel like that, you know, with that design, he should put it somewhere else.
He says the hotel's glass frontage contrasts too strongly with the Octagon's heritage buildings. More than 200 submissions have been filed on the proposed hotel, which would feature 210 hotel rooms plus apartments, an art gallery, public hot pools and conference rooms. 3/4 of submitters have opposed the designs, but it's drawn support from the Otago Chamber of Commerce, with a member survey showing 80% in favour. Some residents think it's just what Dunedin needs. Vivian Child says as the city's new Forsyth Bar Stadium attracts more international events, it's time tourists and entertainers were offered more and better accommodation.
I've noticed that there are often cries that there's not enough top-end accommodation in Dunedin. So I think, as well as the stadium, having a high top-end sort of hotel would be very useful for the city. And I think there's also a market out there in tourism as well, where people perhaps are avoiding, certainly I know people who are avoiding coming to Dunedin because they don't regard the accommodation as being the standard that they've become used to expecting.
The hotel's developer, Tony Toswell, who represents Horizon Hospitality Group, says the hotel is being built high rather than wide out of consideration for the views of people living in the inner city rise area. He says its modern design should complement the surrounding heritage buildings, and it would be an insult to even try to replicate them. Public hearings on the submissions will take place in July. In Dunedin for Checkpoint, Lydia Anderson.
We're going to end tonight with some sport. The Tall Blacks, which is the national basketball team, of course, will face more international competition after joining the Asian Basketball League. They'll now play games here and away against teams like China as part of the 2019 World Cup qualifier. And they'll also compete in the Asian Cup in Lebanon later this year. At a press conference in Coolangatta this afternoon, Tall Blacks coach Paul Henare told Matt Chatterton being part of the new league was a boost for the team with or without Stephen Adams.
I think just having the consistent exposure throughout the calendar year. We know our schedule over the next few years, so that's important in terms of planning and knowing what our commitments are over that time. And just being able to play consistently on our home floor. Be able to create a bit more of a home base and a fan base that people can really get in behind the Tall Blacks.
I guess we are so used to only seeing them once every sort of 2 years playing against Australia. There's so much more exposure now. What will you think, I guess, this do for young people looking at basketball in New Zealand when we've got, a country that's dominated by sports like rugby?
Yeah, I think it would just give more opportunities for young basketball fans and young sports fans to see some of their idols on the floor running around and hooping it up, and that can only be a good thing for our younger generation.
From your perspective, going over to the Asia Cup this year, it's quite a big tournament to be part of. How, I guess, what will your sort of lineup look like, I guess, for that?
In terms of lineup, it always depends on availability and health of our guys, but we'll definitely be looking to take our strongest team possible with who's available, because we really see that Asia Cup as a platform or a really good lead into this new qualification system starting in November, and so it's a perfect environment for us to, I guess, see the lay of the land and see some of our opposition and who we're going to be up against. Obviously, we know who we're playing, so we'll be able to scout them a little bit more and understand who they have in terms of talent, and the guys will be able to see that too, most importantly.
I guess playing China, a real powerhouse in the basketball world, and they are the host of the World Cup in 2019, must be a real treat to have come back to New Zealand.
Yeah, July 1st, 2018, it's going to be a real special time for New Zealand basketball and for Chinese basketball, especially the Chinese fans and public and people that we have in New Zealand. It's going to be a huge occasion, and something that I know the guys will really look forward to.
One name that always, when you talk about Basketball New Zealand and you associate it with, is Stephen Adams. What is the likelihood of getting to see him play for New Zealand in the Black Singlet anytime soon?
Well, I mean, there's always a chance, but you know, we haven't been able to make it happen yet. But it's something that we're always working towards, and you know, hopefully I'll get a chance to sit down with Steve and just, you know, let him see the schedule and the commitments that we have over the next few years, and where he could possibly fit. And those are, you know, quite limited in terms of the times that he can play with the clashes with the NBA season. So, you know, hopefully it won't be too daunting in terms of the commitment he has to make. But you know, it's something that we're always working towards for sure.
Yeah, as you cut, does sort of appear as though there could be a gap there for him to play. Is that a possibility, you think?
I mean, there's a gap there, but again, you know, some of his commitments in the NBA off-season have, you know, created an obstacle in terms of him playing at that time of year. So, again, that won't be known until we get a chance to sit down and talk.
Paul Henare talking to our sports reporter Matt Chatterton about what is a pretty big announcement for the Tall Blacks, bringing Checkpoint to an end for tonight. On behalf of our hard-working and really excellent team, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate having your company. We will be back here on RNZ, on Sky Channel 83, on Freeview Channel 50, on Facebook and on YouTube tomorrow night at 5 o'clock. Until then, a very good evening indeed.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Hawke's Bay Regional Council is defending itself against a finding that it failed to protect public health. Subpoenas seeking business records have been sent to associates of the former US National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Tourism groups want laws changed to allow dock and private operators to profit from conservation land. And decorations on babies' graves in Auckland have been damaged by contractors. Our next news and weather is at 7.
This week on Inside Out, it's all about the Adderley brothers, Cannonball and Nat, who are something of a dynamic duo in the hard bop and soul jazz genres. That's Inside Out with me, Nick Tipping, tonight